I watched the HOA president slam her manicured fist on my doorstep and demand access to my garage, and I knew right then that this winter in Boulder, Colorado was going to be one hell of a ride. My name is Quentin Zimmerman, and I had been living in the Ridgeview Heights community for exactly 8 months when this nightmare began. I bought my 3-bedroom ranch house in April, right after my divorce was finalized and I needed a fresh start. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained properties, friendly neighbors who waved when you drove past. I should have known better when I saw those perfectly manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. I should have read the HOA documents more carefully instead of skimming them during the closing. But hindsight is 20/20, and there I was on that frigid November morning, staring at Sharon Patterson, the 47-year-old president of the Ridgeview Heights Homeowners Association, as she pointed at my garage with an expression that could freeze hell itself. "Mr. Zimmerman, I need you to understand that this is a community," Sharon said, her blonde bob haircut not moving an inch despite the bitter wind whipping through the street. "We share resources here. We take care of each other." I crossed my arms over my chest, feeling the cold seep through my flannel shirt. "Sharon, I'm not sure what you're talking about. I pay my dues on time. My lawn is maintained. I haven't violated any rules." Her eyes narrowed behind her designer glasses. "I'm talking about your salt supply. Linda Morrison told me you have at least 40 bags of rock salt stored in your garage. The community is running low, and we need you to contribute half of your supply to the communal reserves." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You want me to give you 20 bags of salt that I purchased with my own money?" "It's not about want, Quentin. It's about need. The forecast is calling for 3 major snowstorms over the next 2 weeks, and several residents didn't prepare adequately. As a community, we have a responsibility to help each other." I had bought those 40 bags back in September when they were on sale at Home Depot. $20 per bag, $800 total. I had learned my lesson the previous winter when I lived in my apartment in Denver and watched people slip and fall in parking lots because management was too cheap to salt properly. When I bought my house, I swore I would never be caught unprepared. "Sharon, I understand the community spirit thing, but I bought that salt for my property. I have a long driveway and a steep walkway. I need it." Her face hardened into that particular expression that middle-aged white women seem to perfect over years of demanding to speak to managers. The HOA bylaws state that residents must contribute to the general welfare of the community. Section 14, paragraph 8. I can have the board invoke emergency sharing provisions. I felt my jaw clench. Emergency sharing provisions for rock salt? Are you serious? Dead serious. "You have until this evening to deliver 20 bags to the community storage shed near the clubhouse. If you refuse, you'll be in violation of HOA regulations and will have to assess fines. $500 per day until compliance." She turned and walked away, her high-heeled boots clicking on my concrete driveway with military precision. I watched her climb into her white Mercedes SUV and drive off, leaving me standing there in the cold, wondering if I had accidentally moved into some kind of suburban dystopia. I went back inside and immediately pulled up the HOA documents on my computer. I spent 3 hours reading through every single page of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Section 14, paragraph 8 did exist. It talked about community welfare and shared resources, but it was vague as hell. The language mentioned emergency situations and community necessities, but it never specifically mentioned salt or any other particular item. It seemed like a clause designed to be stretched and interpreted however the board wanted. I called my neighbor, Rick Hendricks, who had lived in Ridgeview Heights for 6 years. He picked up on the third ring. "Rick, it's Quentin from 3 houses down. You got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "Has the HOA ever invoked this emergency sharing provision before?" There was a long pause. "Oh man, did Sharon come after your salt? So this is a thing. She does it every winter. Last year she tried to make the Johnsons share their snowblower. The year before, she demanded the Carters hand over half their firewood. She's obsessed with this idea that the HOA should control all resources in the neighborhood. That's insane. Can she actually fine me $500 a day? She'll try. The board usually backs her up because, honestly, most people are too scared to fight her. She makes life hell for anyone who opposes her. Suddenly, you're getting violation notices for grass being 1/8 of an inch too tall, or your house number being the wrong shade of brass. It's easier to just go along. I thanked Rick and hung up, feeling anger build in my chest. I wasn't the type to roll over when someone tried to bully me. My ex-wife used to complain that I was too stubborn, too willing to fight battles that didn't matter. But this mattered. This was my property, my money, my rights. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching Colorado HOA law. Turns out, while HOAs have significant power, they can't just arbitrarily confiscate personal property. The emergency sharing clause would only hold up if there was an actual community emergency, not just poor planning by individual residents. Salt for driveways didn't constitute an emergency when everyone had advance notice about winter coming and chose not to prepare. At 6 o'clock that evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sharon standing there with 2 other board members. I recognized Martin Fletcher, the treasurer, and Diane Wu, the secretary. They all looked official and serious, like they were serving me a court summons. "Mr. Zimmerman, we're here to document your refusal to comply with HOA emergency provisions," Sharon said, holding up her phone like she was recording. "I'm not refusing anything because there's no emergency. Winter weather is predictable. If residents didn't buy salt, that's their problem, not mine." Martin stepped forward. He was a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses. "The board has voted unanimously to invoke the emergency sharing clause. You're now officially in violation. Fines begin tomorrow at $500 per day. You can't fine me for not giving you my personal property. That's not legal." Deanne spoke up, her voice softer than the others. "Quentin, why don't you just share 10 bags instead of 20? We can compromise here." "Because it's the principle. You don't get to take my stuff because other people failed to plan ahead. If someone needs salt that badly, they can go to the store and buy it like I did." Sharon's face flushed red. "The stores are sold out. The first storm is hitting tomorrow night. People are going to get hurt because of your selfishness. Then maybe those people should have bought salt in September when it was available and on sale, like I did." We stood there in a tense standoff for a long moment. Finally, Sharon lowered her phone. "Fine. You'll be hearing from our attorney. The fines start tomorrow, and they'll continue until you comply or we place a lien on your property." They left, and I closed the door, feeling my heart race. This was really happening. They were actually going to try to fine me into submission over rock salt. The next morning, I woke up to find an official violation notice taped to my front door. It detailed my refusal to comply with emergency sharing provisions and stated that I now owed $500, with an additional $500 to be added each day until compliance. I took photos of the notice and immediately called an attorney. I found Margaret Chen through an online search. She specialized in HOA disputes and had stellar reviews. Her office was in downtown Boulder, and she agreed to see me that afternoon. Margaret was a sharp-dressed woman in her early 40s, with short black hair, and an expression that suggested she had seen every type of HOA nonsense imaginable. I sat in her office and explained the situation while she took notes. "So they want your salt, you said no, and now they're fining you $500 per day," she repeated. "That's the summary, yeah." She leaned back in her chair. "Quentin, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've seen HOAs try to pull some ridiculous stuff, but this might crack the top 10. The emergency sharing clause is essentially unenforceable in this situation. Colorado law is pretty clear that HOAs can't arbitrarily confiscate or demand personal property without demonstrating a genuine emergency that threatens health and safety. So what do I do? First, don't pay the fines. Don't acknowledge them as valid. Second, document everything. Every interaction, every notice, every conversation. Third, we're going to send them a cease and desist letter explaining that their interpretation of the bylaws is incorrect and that any attempt to collect these fines or place a lien on your property will result in legal action. Will that stop them? She smiled grimly. Probably not. People like Sharon Patterson don't back down easily. They'll likely push forward, which means we'll end up in court. But that's actually good for you. A judge will take one look at this situation and shut it down. Plus, if they act egregiously enough, we might be able to argue harassment and abuse of power. I left her office feeling slightly better. At least I had someone in my corner who knew what they were doing. The storm hit that night, just as predicted. 12 inches of heavy, wet snow dumped on Boulder County. I got up at 5 in the morning and spent 2 hours clearing my driveway and walkway, then liberally salted everything. My property was clear and safe. As I finished up, I noticed several other driveways in the neighborhood were covered in snow with no salt visible. People were going to have a rough time getting to work. Around 8, I saw Sharon walking down the street with a camera, taking pictures of unsalted driveways. She pointedly photographed my perfectly clear, well-salted driveway, then glared at me. I waved cheerfully and went inside. An hour later, there was a commotion outside. I looked out my window to see an ambulance in front of the Martins' house 4 doors down. Apparently, elderly Mrs. Martin had slipped on her icy walkway and broken her hip. The paramedics were loading her into the ambulance while her husband looked on, distraught. I felt bad for Mrs. Martin, but I also knew what was coming. Sure enough, within an hour, my doorbell rang. Sharon stood there with her phone out, recording again. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Agnes Martin is on her way to the hospital because her walkway wasn't salted. This is exactly the kind of emergency we were trying to prevent." "Sharon, the Martins have lived here for 20 years. They knew winter was coming. They could have bought salt. Their lack of preparation isn't my responsibility. You could have prevented this. You have bags and bags of salt sitting in your garage doing nothing while our neighbors are getting hurt. I have salt in my garage that I'm going to use on my property throughout the winter. It's not doing nothing. It's being saved for future storms. This is the first one. You're heartless. I'm practical, and I'm not responsible for other adults' failure to prepare for predictable weather events." She leaned in close. "You're going to regret this. I'm going to make sure everyone in this neighborhood knows what kind of selfish person you are." She stormed off, and I closed the door, feeling a knot in my stomach. I didn't want anyone to get hurt, but I also wasn't going to be bullied into giving up my property because other people didn't plan ahead. Over the next few days, things escalated. Sharon went door to door in the neighborhood, talking to residents about my refusal to share salt. I started getting dirty looks from neighbors. Someone egged my car. My mailbox was knocked over one night. I filed a police report, but they said without witnesses or camera footage, there wasn't much they could do. Margaret sent the cease and desist letter to the HOA board. They responded through their attorney, doubling down on their position. The fines continued to accumulate. After 1 week, they claimed I owed $3,500. They sent another notice saying that if I didn't pay within 30 days, they would place a lien on my property. Margaret filed a lawsuit in Boulder County Court, challenging the fines and seeking an injunction against the HOA's enforcement actions. The court date was set for 3 weeks out, right before Christmas. During those 3 weeks, 2 more storms hit. Each time, I salted my property thoroughly. Each time, multiple other properties in the neighborhood had inadequate salt coverage. 3 more people slipped and fell, though none as seriously as Mrs. Martin. Each incident ramped up the anger toward me. I received hate mail in my mailbox, nasty notes calling me selfish, greedy, a bad neighbor. Someone spray painted "Share the Salt" on my garage door. I had to repaint it myself, which cost me $200 and an entire weekend. Rick called me one evening, sounding apologetic. "Hey man, I just wanted to give you a heads up. Sharon is organizing a neighborhood meeting to discuss your situation. She's telling everyone that you're violating community standards and putting people at risk. When is this meeting?" "Tomorrow night at the clubhouse. 7 o'clock. Am I invited?" "I don't think you'd be welcome, honestly." People are pretty worked up. Against Margaret's advice, I decided to attend. I wanted to face my accusers directly and hear what they had to say. I walked into the clubhouse at 7 the next evening. The room fell silent as I entered. About 40 residents were there, sitting in folding chairs arranged in rows. Sharon stood at the front near a podium, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw me. "This is a private meeting for residents concerned about community welfare," she said coldly. "I'm a resident," I replied, taking a seat in the back row. "I pay my dues. I have every right to be here." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sharon's jaw tightened, but she couldn't really kick me out without looking even more authoritarian. "Fine," she said. "Stay if you want." We were just discussing the salt crisis and the lack of cooperation from certain community members. For the next 30 minutes, I sat and listened as Sharon painted me as the neighborhood villain. She talked about Agnes Martin's broken hip, about the 3 other people who had fallen, about the dangers of icy walkways and driveways. She carefully framed the narrative to make it sound like I was hoarding essential emergency supplies while neighbors suffered. Several residents spoke up in agreement. Linda Morrison, who I later learned was Sharon's best friend, stood and addressed the crowd. "I've lived here for 8 years, and I've never seen someone so selfish and uncaring. Quentin has enough salt to cover every driveway on this block, but he refuses to help anyone but himself. What kind of person does that?" Others chimed in with similar sentiments. I felt my face flush with anger, but I kept quiet, letting them talk themselves out. Finally, Sharon asked if anyone had anything else to say. I stood up. "I'd like to respond, if that's okay." Sharon looked like she wanted to refuse, but too many eyes were on her. "Go ahead." I walked to the front of the room, feeling every hostile gaze follow me. "I understand that people are upset. Nobody wants to see neighbors get hurt, but let's be clear about what actually happened here. I bought 40 bags of salt in September with my own money because I wanted to make sure my property was safe all winter long. That was me being responsible and planning ahead." "You bought way more than you needed," someone shouted from the crowd. "Did I? We're not even halfway through winter yet. There are going to be more storms." I calculated how much salt I would need for my driveway and walkways for the entire season, and I bought accordingly. The fact that I prepared doesn't make me responsible for people who didn't. "But you could help people now," Linda said. "You have extra." "I don't have extra. I have what I need for the season. And even if I did have extra, it's my property. The HOA doesn't get to decide how I use my personal belongings." Sharon stepped forward. "The bylaws clearly state that residents must contribute to community welfare in emergency situations." "This isn't an emergency. An emergency is something unexpected and unavoidable. Winter in Colorado is neither of those things. Everyone had months to buy salt. It was all over the stores. I'm not responsible for other people's failure to plan." "What about Agnes Martin?" Sharon demanded. "She's 78 years old. She broke her hip because her walkway was icy. And that's terrible. I genuinely feel bad for her. But Agnes Martin has a husband and 3 adult children who live in the area. Any one of them could have made sure she had salt. The stores didn't run out until after the first storm hit. There was plenty of time." The room erupted in angry voices. People were shouting over each other, calling me names, accusing me of lacking compassion. I stood there and took it, waiting for them to quiet down. When they finally did, I continued. "Look, I get it. You all think I'm a jerk, but this isn't really about salt. This is about the HOA trying to overstep its authority. Today it's salt. Tomorrow it's your snowblower, your generator, your firewood, your lawn mower. Where does it end? When does your personal property stop being yours and start being community property?" "This is different," Martin Fletcher said. "This is a health and safety issue." "No, it's a personal responsibility issue. Adults are responsible for their own safety and their own property. If someone can't manage that, they should ask for help, and neighbors can choose to help if they want. But it should be voluntary, not mandated by the HOA under threat of fines." Sharon's face was red now. "You're being fined because you're in violation of the bylaws." "It has nothing to do with voluntary anything. I'm being fined because you're abusing your authority, and I'll see you in court to prove it." I walked out of the clubhouse to a chorus of boos and angry shouts. My hands were shaking, but I felt oddly proud of myself for standing up to them. The following days were worse. More vandalism, more hate mail. Someone slashed my tires. I installed security cameras around my property and caught footage of a teenager throwing eggs at my house. I recognized him as the son of one of the board members. I sent the footage to the police, who gave the kid a warning. Margaret called me a few days before the court date. "Quentin, I need to prepare you. The HOA has submitted a pretty substantial response to our lawsuit. They're claiming that your refusal to share salt has directly endangered community health and safety. They've got statements from Agnes Martin's family, from the other people who fell, from numerous neighbors. They're painting you as a public menace. Can they win? No, the law is on our side. But they're going to make this ugly. The judge might not like either of you by the time it's over. I can live with that." The court date arrived on December 20th. I put on my best suit and met Margaret at the Boulder County Courthouse at 8 in the morning. The HOA showed up in force. Sharon was there with her attorney, a sharp-looking man named Douglas Brennan. Martin and Diane were there too, along with about 15 other residents who had come to support the HOA's position. We entered the courtroom, and I felt my stomach churn. I had never been involved in a lawsuit before. Judge Patricia Horowitz presided, a stern-looking woman in her 60s who seemed impatient before we even started. "This is case number 24-5579, Zimmerman versus Ridgeview Heights Homeowners Association," she began. "Counselors, I've reviewed the briefs. Mr. Brennan, you're representing the HOA. Please present your case." Douglas Brennan stood and launched into a passionate argument about community responsibility, shared resources, and the importance of HOA bylaws. He presented photos of icy driveways, medical records from Agnes Martin's broken hip, and testimony from neighbors about the dangerous conditions. Your Honor, the defendant, Mr. Zimmerman, has willfully and maliciously refused to contribute to the community welfare during a genuine emergency. His actions have directly resulted in injuries to elderly residents. The HOA's emergency sharing clause exists precisely for situations like this, and Mr. Zimmerman's refusal to comply represents a flagrant violation of the community covenants he agreed to when purchasing his property. He went on for 20 minutes, really hammering home the idea that I was a selfish monster who didn't care if old ladies broke their hips. Then it was Margaret's turn. She stood calmly and addressed the judge. Your Honor, this case is actually quite simple. The HOA is attempting to seize private property without legal authority. The emergency sharing clause in the Ridgeview Heights bylaws is vague and has never been properly tested or defined. More importantly, there was no emergency. Winter weather is predictable and expected in Colorado. Every resident had ample opportunity to purchase salt and prepare their properties. She pulled out her own evidence. Receipts showing that major retailers in the Boulder area had abundant salt supplies throughout September and October. Weather forecasts from November showing multiple advance warnings about incoming storms. Testimony from store managers confirming that salt was available for purchase up until the day before the first storm. The HOA is not attempting to address an emergency, Your Honor. They're attempting to punish a homeowner for being better prepared than others. Mr. Zimmerman spent his own money purchasing salt for his own property. The fact that other residents failed to do the same does not give the HOA the right to confiscate his property under the guise of an emergency sharing clause. Judge Horowitz listened to both sides, occasionally asking questions. She seemed particularly interested in the specific language of the emergency sharing clause and whether it had ever been invoked before. Then came witness testimony. Sharon took the stand first, and Brennan questioned her about the situation. Miss Patterson, can you explain to the court why the HOA felt it necessary to invoke the emergency sharing clause? We were facing a crisis, Sharon said earnestly. Multiple storms were forecasted, and many residents didn't have adequate salt supplies. The stores were sold out. People were going to get hurt, and they did get hurt. We needed everyone to pull together and share resources. And did Mr. Zimmerman refuse to cooperate? Completely. He has 40 bags of salt, which is far more than any one household needs. We asked him to contribute half to the community supply, and he refused. He was hostile and uncaring about the safety of his neighbors. Margaret Cross examined her, and that's when things got interesting. Miss Patterson, you said the stores were sold out. When did they sell out? After the first storm hit. So before the first storm, salt was available for purchase. Yes, but people didn't realize they needed it until the storm hit. The storm that was forecasted a week in advance. Sharon hesitated. Not everyone watches the weather that closely. Miss Patterson, how long have you lived in Colorado? 23 years. So you're familiar with winter weather patterns, of course. And you knew that winter storms were coming. Generally, yes. Did you personally purchase salt before the first storm? Sharon's face tightened. I had some from last year. How much? A few bags. How many is a few? 3 or 4. And how large is your property? I have a standard driveway and walkway. Similar to Mr. Zimmerman's property, I suppose. So you, as HOA president, had 3 to 4 bags of salt for a property similar in size to Mr. Zimmerman's, but you're demanding that he give up half of his 40 bags because he overprepared. It's not about overpreparing. It's about sharing when there's a need. Miss Patterson, Did the HOA ever offer to compensate Mr. Zimmerman for the salt you demanded? She blinked. Compensate him? Yes. Pay him for the salt. He purchased it for $20 per bag. Did the HOA offer to pay him $400 for the 20 bags you demanded? We shouldn't have to pay. It's a community emergency. But it's his property that he purchased with his own money. If the HOA wants it, shouldn't the HOA buy it? Sharon looked flustered. The bylaws say residents must contribute during emergencies. And we'll get to the validity of that clause in a moment. But just to be clear, the HOA made no offer to compensate Mr. Zimmerman for his property, correct? Correct. Margaret sat down, looking satisfied. The HOA called several other witnesses. Linda Morrison testified about seeing me salt my driveway while others struggled. One of the people who had slipped and fallen testified about their injuries. Agnes Martin's daughter testified tearfully about her mother's broken hip and long recovery ahead. It was brutal. I sat there feeling like the worst person in the world, even though I knew logically I had done nothing wrong. Then Margaret called me to the stand. I swore in and sat down, trying to keep my composure. Mr. Zimmerman, why did you purchase 40 bags of salt? I calculated how much I would need for the entire winter season. I have a long driveway and a steep front walkway. Based on typical snowfall in Boulder and recommended salt application rates, 40 bags seemed appropriate. Did you intend to hoard salt or prevent others from purchasing it? No. I bought mine in September when there was plenty available. Anyone else could have done the same. Why did you refuse the HOA's demand? Because it was unreasonable. They wanted me to give up half my supply with no compensation and no guarantee that I would have enough for the rest of the season. Also, it's my property. I don't think the HOA has the right to take people's belongings just because other residents didn't prepare. Have you used the salt you purchased? Yes. I've gone through about 12 bags so far on my property. So the 40 bags weren't excessive, not at all. At this rate, I'll use all 40 by the end of winter. Brennan Cross examined me, trying to paint me as selfish and uncaring. He asked why I didn't voluntarily help neighbors in need. I explained that I had offered to sell salt at cost to anyone who asked directly, but nobody took me up on it because Sharon had told everyone not to give me any money. That detail seemed to catch Judge Horowitz's attention. You offered to sell the salt? Yes, Your Honor. I told Sharon I'd be willing to sell bags at $20 each, which is exactly what I paid. She refused and said the HOA wouldn't pay for resources that should be shared freely. The judge made a note. After witness testimony concluded, both attorneys made closing arguments. Brennan continued to hammer the community safety angle. Margaret focused on property rights and the improper use of HOA authority. Finally, Judge Horowitz spoke. I'm going to issue a ruling from the bench because this matter is fairly straightforward, despite both parties' attempts to complicate it. She looked directly at the HOA's table. The emergency sharing clause in the Ridgeview Heights HOA bylaws is vague to the point of being unenforceable. It does not specify what constitutes an emergency, what resources can be shared, or what process must be followed. More critically, it appears to authorize the taking of private property without compensation, which is problematic under both Colorado law and the United States Constitution. Sharon's face went pale. While I appreciate the HOA's stated concern for community safety, predictable winter weather does not constitute an emergency justifying the seizure of personal property. Residents had ample opportunity to prepare for winter conditions. The fact that many chose not to do so does not create an emergency that empowers the HOA to confiscate property from residents who did prepare. Judge Horowitz turned to me. Mr. Zimmerman, while you were within your legal rights. I'll note that a little neighborly kindness might have prevented this entire situation. However, kindness cannot be legally mandated, and your refusal to voluntarily surrender your property does not constitute a violation of HOA bylaws. She looked back at the HOA table. The fines assessed against Mr. Zimmerman are hereby voided in their entirety. The HOA is enjoined from attempting to collect these fines or placing any lien on Mr. Zimmerman's property. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Zimmerman's legal fees, which I understand from the filings are approximately $8,500. The courtroom erupted. Sharon looked like she had been slapped. Residents who had come to support the HOA were murmuring angrily. "Order," Judge Horowitz said firmly. "I'm not finished." The room quieted. "I'm also going to address some concerning behavior that came up during testimony. Miss Patterson, you organized a neighborhood campaign against Mr. Zimmerman that apparently included vandalism, harassment, and destruction of property. While you may not have personally committed these acts, you created an environment that encouraged them." Sharon started to object, but the judge cut her off. "I'm not making findings of criminal conduct at this time, but I'm putting you on notice. If Mr. Zimmerman experiences any further harassment, vandalism, or intimidation, I will not hesitate to hold you and the HOA board personally responsible. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sharon said quietly. "This court is adjourned." The gavel came down, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Margaret shook my hand and congratulated me. We gathered our materials and headed out of the courtroom while the HOA contingent sat in stunned silence. Outside in the hallway, Margaret pulled me aside. "That went even better than I expected. You won completely. They have to pay your legal fees, the fines are void, and the judge essentially told them to back off or face consequences. What happens now? Now you go home and live your life. They can't touch you. If they try anything, we'll be back in court, and next time they might face contempt charges or worse." I thanked her and headed to my car, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The stress and anger that had been building up finally released. I had stood my ground, fought back against unreasonable authority, and won. But as I drove home, I wondered what kind of reception I would get in the neighborhood. Would people accept the court's ruling, or would I be even more of a pariah now? I got my answer when I pulled onto my street. Several neighbors were outside and they actually waved. Rick Hendricks came over as I was getting out of my car. "Hey man, I heard you won. Congratulations. News travels fast." Sharon's best friends are melting down on the neighborhood Facebook group, everyone seeing the judge's ruling. A lot of people are realizing that maybe Sharon went too far. "You think things will calm down now?" Rick shrugged. "Hard to say. Some people are still angry at you, but others are starting to question whether the HOA should have that much power over residents. You might have actually done the neighborhood a favor by pushing back." Over the next few days, the dynamics in Ridgeview Heights shifted dramatically. The neighborhood Facebook group, which I had avoided during the whole ordeal, exploded with debate. Some residents continued to defend Sharon and attack me, but a growing number started questioning the HOA's actions and the emergency sharing clause itself. Several people posted about other times Sharon had overstepped her authority. Stories came out about fines for minor violations, threats over paint colors that were barely distinguishable from approved shades, and demands for access to people's property for inspections that weren't in the bylaws. A petition started circulating to call for Sharon's resignation as HOA president. Within a week, it had signatures from over 60% of the neighborhood. Sharon tried to fight it, but the board ultimately had no choice. Martin and Deanne, facing their own pressure from residents, voted to accept her resignation. Sharon sent me one final email before stepping down. It was short and bitter. "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this community." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. But then something happened that I didn't expect. 3 days after Sharon resigned, I came home to find an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a handwritten note from Agnes Martin's daughter. "Mr. Zimmerman, I want to apologize for the things I said about you in court. After everything came out about Sharon's behavior and the HOA's overreach, I realized that my mother's accident wasn't your fault. Mom made the decision not to buy salt, even though my brother offered to get her some. She thought she could just stay inside during storms. Her fall was an accident and her own choice, not your responsibility. I'm sorry you were blamed for it. Thank you for standing up to the HOA. A lot of us are seeing now how out of control things had gotten." I read the note 3 times, feeling emotion well up in my chest. It was the first genuine apology I had received from anyone in the neighborhood. More followed over the next week. Linda Morrison, of all people, knocked on my door one evening. "I'm not here to apologize," she said when I opened the door, though her tone was less hostile than before. "But I am here to buy salt if you're still willing to sell it. How much do you need? 3 bags should get me through the rest of winter." $60. She handed me the cash without argument. I went to my garage and loaded 3 bags into her car. As she was leaving, she paused. "For what it's worth, Sharon wasn't a good friend to me during all this. She used me to get information about you and to rally people against you, but when things fell apart, she blamed me for not being persuasive enough. I'm starting to realize she's been manipulating a lot of people for a long time. I appreciate you telling me that." She nodded and drove away. Over the next week, 5 more neighbors came to buy salt from me. I sold them bags at cost, just like I had offered from the beginning. Word spread that I was reasonable and willing to help people who approached me directly and respectfully. The HOA held an emergency election for a new president. A woman named Rachel Torres, who had been vocal about Sharon's overreach, won easily. One of her first acts was to propose revising the bylaws to clarify the limits of HOA authority and eliminate vague clauses that could be abused. I attended the meeting where the revisions were discussed. The room was packed with residents who wanted to make sure nothing like the salt incident could happen again. I spoke briefly about my experience and the importance of protecting property rights while still maintaining reasonable community standards. The revisions passed unanimously. The new bylaws explicitly stated that the HOA could not confiscate or demand personal property from residents under any circumstances. Emergency provisions were rewritten to focus on community facilities and common areas, not private property. Rachel approached me after the meeting. "Quentin, I want to thank you for fighting back. A lot of us were uncomfortable with Sharon's tactics for years, but we were too afraid to say anything. You forced the issue, and it's going to make this a better community going forward." "I just wanted to keep my salt," I said with a smile. "Well, you did that and a whole lot more." Life in Ridgeview Heights gradually returned to normal. The vandalism stopped. The hate mail stopped. People started waving again when I drove by. Some neighbors even became friendly, striking up conversations when we ran into each other at the mailbox or the grocery store. Rick Hendricks became a good friend. We started getting together for beers on Friday nights, talking about work and sports and neighborhood gossip. He told me that Sharon had moved out of Ridgeview Heights entirely, selling her house in February and moving to a different neighborhood across town. "Good riddance," Rick said when he told me. "That woman made life miserable for a lot of people. You were just the one who finally stood up to her." Winter progressed, and I used my salt exactly as I had planned. By March, I was down to my last 5 bags. If I had given the HOA 20 bags back in November, I would have run out in January and been in the same boat as everyone else who didn't prepare adequately. The vindication felt good, but more than that, I felt like I had genuinely made a difference. The new HOA board was more transparent and reasonable. Bylaws were clearer and fairer. Residents felt more empowered to question decisions and push back against overreach. I got a final piece of satisfaction in April when the HOA's check for my legal fees arrived. $8,500, just as the judge had ordered. Margaret had actually only charged me $6,000, so I ended up making a small profit on the whole ordeal. I used some of the extra money to buy a new grill and invited Rick and a few other neighbors over for a cookout. As we sat on my back deck, drinking beers and watching the sun set over the Colorado mountains, Rick raised his bottle in a toast. To Quentin, the man who taught Ridgeview Heights that no one, not even the HOA, can take your salt. Everyone laughed and drank, and I felt truly at home for the first time since moving to the neighborhood, but the story doesn't quite end there. In late April, I received a call from Margaret Chen. "Quentin, I thought you should know. Sharon Patterson is suing the Ridgeview Heights HOA. For what? Wrongful termination as president. She's claiming the board violated her rights by forcing her to resign and that you orchestrated a harassment campaign against her." I felt anger flare up. "Are you kidding me?" "Unfortunately not. She's also named you as a co-defendant, claiming you defamed her character and intentionally caused her emotional distress. Can she do that? She can file the lawsuit, but it's not going anywhere. Everything you did was protected by your rights as a homeowner and a litigant. You didn't defame her. You defended yourself against her actions. As for the HOA, they had every right to accept her resignation after she created massive legal liability for the association. So what do I do? Nothing yet. The HOA's insurance will cover their defense, and I'm happy to represent you again. This is likely just Sharon lashing out because she lost control and can't handle it. The case will probably get dismissed on summary judgment, and that's exactly what happened. Sharon's lawsuit dragged on for a few months, requiring me to give a deposition and submit to some discovery. But in September, the judge granted summary judgment in favor of both me and the HOA. Sharon's claims were ruled frivolous, and she was ordered to pay both defendants legal fees. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she ended up having to sell her new house to pay the legal bills. I should have felt triumphant, but mostly I just felt sad. Sharon had destroyed her own life through her need to control others and her inability to accept when she was wrong. As for me, I stayed in Ridgeview Heights. The neighborhood really did become a better place to live. The new HOA board was reasonable and responsive. Community events became more inclusive and less dictatorial. People looked out for each other voluntarily rather than being forced to by overbearing rules. When the next winter rolled around, I bought my 40 bags of salt again in September. But this time, several neighbors asked if I could pick up bags for them too while I was at the store. I became the unofficial salt coordinator for my street, buying in bulk and distributing to anyone who wanted some, all at cost. It was exactly the kind of community cooperation that Sharon had tried to force, but could never achieve. The difference was that it was voluntary, respectful, and based on mutual benefit rather than threats and fines. I learned a lot from the whole experience. I learned that standing up for your rights, even when it's unpopular, is important. I learned that most people are reasonable if you give them the chance to be. I learned that authority without accountability inevitably leads to abuse. And I learned that sometimes the best way to bring a community together is to stand apart and force everyone to think about what kind of community they really want to be. Every time it snows now, I go out early in the morning and salt my driveway and walkway. Then, I usually do Rick's too and Mrs. Henderson's across the street since she's elderly and lives alone. Not because anyone demands it or forces me to, but because it's the right thing to do. And when I'm out there at 6 in the morning, spreading salt in the frigid darkness, I sometimes think about that day in November when Sharon Patterson demanded my salt bags. I think about how absurd the whole situation was, how it spiraled out of control, and how it ultimately led to positive change. The bags of salt in my garage aren't just ice prevention anymore. They're a symbol of property rights, personal responsibility, and the importance of pushing back against unreasonable authority. They're a reminder that sometimes the smallest fights have the biggest consequences. Sharon wanted me to share my salt. Instead, I taught a whole neighborhood about boundaries, rights, and the difference between forced compliance and genuine community. I watched her lose everything in court 3 weeks after her initial demand, and while I take no pleasure in her downfall, I have no regrets about standing my ground. Winter in Colorado is predictable, inevitable, and harsh. But with proper preparation, a little salt, and the willingness to stand up for yourself, you can weather any storm. I still live in Ridgeview Heights. My driveway is always clear. My walkway is always safe. And my garage still has plenty of salt, enough to last the season, purchased with my own money and used at my own discretion. That's exactly how it should be, and no HOA will ever convince me otherwise.